The British Poet Laureate is an honorary position appointed by the monarch of the United Kingdom, currently on the advice of the Prime Minister. The role does not entail any specific duties, but there is an expectation that the holder will write verse for significant national occasions. The origins of the laureateship date back to 1616, when a pension was provided to Ben Jonson by James I. But the first official holder of the position was John Dryden, appointed in 1668 by Charles II, when the post was made an established royal office within the royal household. Dryden, who had been appointed following the success of his 1667 poem Annus Mirabilis, was dismissed from office in 1689, following the accession of the Protestant William III and Mary II to the throne. Dryden, a Catholic convert, refused to take the oath of allegiance to the new monarchs, and he was dismissed from the laureateship, the only holder to have been removed from office. On the death of Alfred Lord Tennyson, who held the post between November 1850 and October 1892, there was a break of 4 years as a mark of respect. Tennyson's laureate poems, Ode on the Death of the Duke of Wellington and The Charge of the Light Brigade, were particularly cherished by the Victorian public. Thomas Gray, Samuel Rogers and Walter Scott turned down the laureateship. When the post of Poet Laureate became vacant in 1984 after the death of Sir John Betjeman, 30%, a plurality of the 120 British poets polled by the Times of London, favoured Philip Larkin to succeed as Poet Laureate. Larkin was approached about becoming Poet Laureate in 1984 following the death of his friend Betjeman, but by this time he was already ill and declined. Instead, Ted Hughes took up the post. Recently, the acclaimed poet Imtiaz Dharka has turned down the Poet Laureateship, citing a need to focus on her writing, and despite reports that she was set to be named as the next holder of the position. I had to weigh the privacy I need to write poems against the demands of a public role. The poems won. Dharka, who was born in Pakistan and grew up in Glasgow, said, "It was a huge honour to be considered for the role of Poet Laureate, and I have been overwhelmed by the messages of support and encouragement from all over the world." The position, as I said, is an honorary one, and the office holder is left to decide on which occasions they will produce poetry. Following Dryden's dismissal from the post, the laureateship was held for life by all successors until Andrew Motion, who was appointed in 1999 for a fixed term of 10 years. His successor, Carol Ann Duffy, was also appointed on the same fixed term. Duffy is the first female poet to have held the role, and she is the first Scot. Since the appointment of Henry James Pye in 1790, the Prime Minister has recommended which candidate to appoint. For the appointment of Duffy, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport undertook a consultation of academics and literary organisations to draw up a short list of recommendations, which they presented to the Prime Minister. He, in conjunction with the Cabinet Office, then submitted the name to the Queen for approval. Dryden's salary for the laureateship was £200 per year. In 1630, Charles I added an annual butt of canary wine. Canary wine. Although this was later discontinued in place of the monetary equivalent. When John Betjeman was appointed, he rekindled the tradition and received 720 bottles of sherry. This practice continues. Since Andrew Motion's appointment, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport provided an annual honorarium of £5,750. Motion also received an additional £19,000 for his work in education. With Duffy's appointment, the salary returned to £5,750 and the barrel of sherry. So, on the 10th of May this year, 2019, it was announced that Simon Armitage would be the next Poet Laureate. He is Professor of Poetry at the University of Leeds and succeeded Geoffrey Hill as Oxford Professor of Poetry when he was elected to the 4-year part-time appointment from 2015 to 2019. Simon Armitage was born in West Yorkshire, England in 1963. He earned a BA from Portsmouth University in Geography and an MS in Social Work from Manchester University, where he studied the impact of televised violence on young offenders. He worked as a probation officer for 6 years before focusing on poetry. In 2015, he was elected Oxford Professor of Poetry, as we've said, and in 2017 he was appointed Professor of Poetry at the University of Leeds. Known for his deadpan delivery, Armitage's formally assured, often darkly comic poetry is influenced by the work of Ted Hughes, W.H. Auden and Philip Larkin. As a reviewer for the online poetryarchive.org observed, with his acute eye for modern life, Armitage is an updated version of Wordsworth's Man Talking to Men. Armitage is the author of numerous collections of poetry, including The Unaccompanied, 2017, Paper Aeroplane, Selected Poems, 1989 to 2014, Seeing Stars, 2010, Tyrannosaurus Rex versus the Corduroy Kid, 2006, The Shout, Selected Poems, 2005, which was shortlisted for the National Book Critics Circle Award, Kid, 1992, which won the Forward Prize, and his first collection, Zoom, of 1989, which was a Poetry Society book choice. Several of his collections have also been shortlisted for the Whitbread Prize and the T.S. Eliot Prize. His translation of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, 2007, from Middle English was selected as a Book of the Year by both the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. His other translations from medieval English include The Death of King Arthur, 2011, which was awarded the Poetry Society Choice Hay Medal Poetry, and Pearl, 2016. Armitage has also published fiction, including the novels The White Stuff and Little Green Man, and the memoir All Points North, which was chosen as a Yorkshire Post Book of the Year. He has written extensively for radio, television, film and theatre, including the libretto for the opera The Assassin Tree. He co-edited with Robert Crawford the Penguin Anthology of Poetry from Britain and Ireland since 1945, which was published in 1998, and edited Short and Sweet, 101 Very Short Poems in 1999. His poetry is often influenced by music, a connection he pursues in his non-fiction book Gig of 2008. Armitage has also performed as a member of the band The Scaremongers. The recipient of numerous honours and awards, Armitage was named the Millennium Poet in 1999 and a Commander of the British Empire in 2010. Goodness me. Quite some CV. So now, the new Poet Laureate. Let's have a look at a few short works by Simon Armitage. This is Zoom, from right at the very start of his career. It begins as a house, an end terrace in this case, but it will not stop there. Soon it is an avenue which cambers arrogantly past the Mechanics Institute, turns left at the main road without even looking, and quickly it is a town with all four major clearing banks, a daily paper and a football team pushing for promotion. On it goes, oblivious of the planning acts, the green belts, and before we know it, it is out of our hands. City, nation, hemisphere, universe, hammering out in all directions until suddenly, mercifully, it is drawn aside through the eye of a black hole and bulleted into a neighbouring galaxy, emerging smaller and smoother than a billiard ball, but weighing more than Saturn. People stop me in the street, badger me in the checkout queue and ask, "What is this? This that is so small and so very smooth, but whose mass is greater than the ringed planet?" It's just words, I assure them, but they will not have it. This is The Unaccompanied by Simon Armitage. Wandering slowly back after dark one night, above a river toward a suspension bridge, a sound concerns him that might be a tune or might not, noise drifting in, trailing off. Then concerns him again, now clearly a song, pulsing out from the opposite bank, being sung by chorusing men, all pewter-haired or bald, in the function suite of a shabby hotel. Above their heads a conductor's hand draws and casts the notes with a white wand. Songs about mills and mines and a great war, about mermaid brides and solid gold hills, songs from broken hymn books and cheesy films. Then his father's voice rising out of that choir, and his father's voice, and voices of fathers before, concerning him only, arcing through charged air and spanning the gorge. He steps over the cliff edge and walks across. Interesting. That reminds me of the poem by Baxter, the New Zealand poet, James K. Baxter, I think his full name was. He dead in his late 40s from alcoholism, but he wrote a wonderful poem, not anthem, anthem to my father's father, elegy of my father's father, about his Scottish and Antipodean cultural roots. But an interesting poem there from Armitage about his heritage in Yorkshire. This is homework. It's evening again, late. I go out into the lane and doodle a beard and a moustache on the face of the moon with a red pen. Over the next hill, an old teacher of mine takes off her glasses and wipes the lenses with a soft cloth. She can't believe what she's just seen. Finally, this is an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. That was the great economic tome written by A. Smith, of course. So an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. Compiling this landmark anthology of poetry in English about dogs and musical instruments is like swimming through bricks. To date, I have only, on the death of Mrs. McTuesday's pug, killed by a falling piano, a somewhat obvious choice. True, an Aeolian harp whispers alluringly in the background of the anonymous sonnet, the huntsman's hound, but beyond that, silence. I should resist this degrading donkey work in favour of my own writing, wherein contentment surely lies. But A. Smith stares smugly from the reverse of the £20 note, and when my bank manager guffaws, small particles of saliva stream like a meteor shower through the infinity of dark space between his world and mine.